let's start this session. My name is Wade Troxel, and I'm on the faculty in mechanical engineering. I also have appointments in systems engineering and biomedical and chemical engineering, and as well as some other associations across campus. I'm here at Colorado State University. I'm a longtime faculty member. I usually, when I'm in this ballroom, in the past, I've welcomed many groups coming to Colorado State and coming to Fort Collins. I'm the recent past mayor of the city of Fort Collins, and so it's fun to have the HXA regional conference here. So welcome to Fort Collins, and enjoy everything that Fort Collins has to offer, including everything here at Colorado State University. And just a little bit about my background. My PhD dealt with a form of generative AI about 35 years ago, and I teach a class in AI and design in mechanical engineering, and so over the years, my research interests are in robotics, automation, intelligent control of distributed systems, and AI and design. So that's where I come from as it relates to this topic for this session is AI in education. I have a great panel today, and first of all, I'd like to introduce Kerry Peetz. Kerry is an assistant director of instructional design at University of Denver's College of Professional Studies, where she feeds a team focused on high-impact online course design for adult and non-traditional students. With a background in instructional design, organizational communication, and educational technology, she specializes in translating complex ideas into accessible, engaging, and learning experiences. Kerry is currently leading efforts to integrate generative AI in instructional design workflows, including assignment mapping, media generation, student-facing role tools. She is particularly interested in AI and how it can enhance both efficiency and critical engagement in higher education. Next, we have Brandon Roberts. Brandon is assistant professor of the departments of zoology and physiology and animal science at University of Wyoming, where he leads a neuroscience research group to understand the circuits and behaviors underlying obesity and associated disorders. He has integrated the use of AI in his lab, the classroom, and service, which has dramatically increased productivity. He serves as the faculty senate representative for university AI in teaching and learning working groups, and is a strong advocate for integrating ethical use of AI in all aspects of academia. And he hopes in the future where AI and learning are viewed as symbiotic, and encourages colleagues to focus on how, not if, to integrate AI in the classroom. Next is Nikhil Krishnaswamy. Nikhil is an assistant professor in computer science here at Colorado State University. He studies language and building intelligent systems and studying how humans interact with them. He also studies the mathematical properties and machine learning models, and has expertise in a wide range of modern AI systems. He received his PhD and master's at Brandeis University. Nikhil's research is published in AI Magazine, Frontiers in Artificial Intelligence, Behavior and Brain Sciences, and many more. And finally, last but not least, we have Jennifer Harmon. Jennifer is an associate professor at the Department of Family and Consumer Studies at the University of Wyoming, where she serves as the campus co-chair for Heterodox Academy. Her research and teaching intersect design and sustainability and technology, with her current focus on AI-assisted learning in textile science and creative design. She also led the development of the course integrated chatbot to support student engagement and critical thinking, and is currently exploring pedagogical implications of generative AI tools in experiential learning environments. and she serves as the University of Wyoming's AI Teaching and Learning Working Group, and has an early voice in the campus-wide conversations on academic integrity, instructional redesign in the AI era. A longtime advocate for the open inquiry in higher education, Jennifer is particularly interested in how universities can adapt to rapid technological shifts without abandoning intellectual rigor and the student agency. So welcome, everybody. And with that, we'll get started. We'll ask some questions here, and then we'll go with the audience. But start off, if you would, we're not going to go in any particular order, but just if you'd like to speak to the question, please do. So how are you and your students using generative AI tools in the classroom?
I think this one we probably can just go straight down the line, but so I teach online. I teach primarily non-traditional students, so in my online classes, they're small, they're only 15, 20 students, but I can have students who are 22 all the way to students who are in their 60s, so it's a huge swath of people with a huge variety of levels of comfort. I teach students in our bachelor's completion program, so these are all students who have attempted a bachelor's at some point in their life, didn't work out for one reason or another, and now they're back to try again. So just to give you some context for my online learners. So I teach a class about the internet, and one way that I used AI in my class, and that I think is really valuable and translatable for other folks, is helping my students to do research and doing research in a way that's like effective and meaningful. So you all, I'm sure, have had the experience of an undergrad coming to you like, I have this great research idea. I want to know how technology is helping veterans. And you're like, that is too broad. We got to dial it in. And you have like a really similar conversation over and over again about like, let's take your super broad topic and we'll drill down. And so that is time consuming and laborious. It is fun, but there's the constraints of real life. So I gave my students prompts to go and help them refine their research questions. So we had some scaffolding through the course of our 10-week quarter. We had various activities where they would go give a prompt to an AI, and then that would help them refine their topic. That would help them think about their research question, think about where they might look for sources. And a big theme for that work with them was to say, AI should not be giving you facts, and I can tell when it does. It should be asking you questions, and I wrote the prompts in such a way that the AI is not volunteering information. It's asking them questions to help them refine their thinking. So what happened as a result of doing that is that my students' final papers and presentations were miles better than the previous versions where they hadn't been using AI. They were focused, they were frankly like interesting, like really broad papers are kind of boring to read and grade. And so their end product was so much better. And for our student population, increasing their confidence is a huge part of our mission because again, these are students who, for one reason or another, were unsuccessful their first round. And so when they come back, they have a lot of fear about their ability to perform. And so watching my students' presentations, again, they're online, they're videos, but the level of confidence that they displayed because they had really been able to think through a question that was interesting to them, they'd been able to find an answer that was interesting to them or pose further questions that were interesting to them was huge. In using AI as that thought partner and as that coach, again, with my input and coaching along with that was tremendous for them. So that's one way that I have used it. I've done a bunch of other things, but I will pass it on so I don't take up the whole time.
Yeah, so I'll frame this in the context of two different classes I teach. One is Human Systems Physiology, which is a really large undergraduate course with about 160 students. And the other is a graduate level course of about 16 students where they present journal articles each week. And in the larger classroom, well, in both, I've used it a lot for syllabus and curriculum development. I think we're out of the era of poorly formatted syllabi with typos and grammatical errors. So I've used it on that front. My students, I actually find more unethical use for my graduate level students than my undergraduate students. Students usually are falling into three different camps: those that are using it to cheat, those that are completely resistant to it, and those that are using it as a tool to help them study and understand the material. And I personally run into the middle one the most. In the graduate level course, one big application I've used it for is we're reading all this current literature in neuroscience. We go through the course, students are presenting all these papers. Last semester at the end, I compiled a PDF of all the papers we discussed and had it pull out data on what techniques were used, what questions were being asked, what models, what neural circuits, and was able to really easily come up with some great visual aids to look at what is the current state of the field and what we've discussed. And that's something that I would not be able to do if I had to manually go through every PDF and start pulling this metadata and things like that. So it's been really helpful. One big thing I use it for that I always try to encourage others to is, especially on the undergraduate level, we've all received those emails that we're not quite sure how to answer. They're quite sensitive. Maybe somebody's going through something tragic. They're struggling with the class and blaming you for destroying their future. You have a lot of things you want to say. Maybe you're frustrated. You can refine it and just blurt out everything you want, right? And have it give the tone and structure that's gonna come off appropriate for students. And it has been incredibly helpful in that regard for just communicating and being sensitive and putting these together instead of staring at the email screen going, I can't say that, I can't say this sentence, I don't know, right? The microstructure just helps it gets it done, and it's been very effective in that regard.
I don't. To break the answer down a little bit more, I actually do research in AI. So my fundamental area of research is natural language processing and machine learning. Those are the two classes that I teach. So to say that I don't use AI in the classroom is categorically incorrect. However, it's not something that I actually develop curriculum around as far as usage. That is, my classes are about teaching people the underlying principles of how these systems function. And that's a little bit different than how we're seeing AI being used in other fields, because I'm there to actually teach people, how these systems are built. And at some level, we don't fully understand how these systems are built, especially because a lot of the most prominent models are they're black boxes. They're kept under lock and key. They are built by companies whose incentive structures are such that they actually, do not want their trade secrets exposed, and that is a reasonable concern on their part, and it's also really frustrating for us as researchers. So what I typically do in my courses is, focus on this is how the system works. This is the relationship between data, training, and task. And sometimes very frequently, this means that the students are going off and finding their own use of AI, right? What I try to do in that case is understand better how they're using it, right? Me personally, the more I understand about AI, the less I want it in my life, right? If we want to I'm not going to get into an ideological discussion here, but if we were to, my position would be it's less interesting, less mysterious, and less cool than you think it is, and you probably should be using it less. But I look at my students, right, and I want to better understand how their cognitive processes are changing when they interact with AI systems, right? This is possibly the central theme of my research at this point. Actually, I just came back from DC last night after presenting research on this topic, to funders. And so it's my classroom activity has really been informed by the struggle to understand how rapidly adopted AI is changing how we think as humans, right? So what I mean by that is that I see generative AI as akin to a select few other technologies in human history that have changed our relationship with truth. And these are writing, the printing press, and the internet, right? The fourth in this line is generative AI. Because what it is doing is it is doing two things. One, it is lowering the barrier to access to information, and is lowering the barrier to creation of information. Right? And we can discuss exactly how this relationship worked historically if you want, but all of these technologies, and they are technologies, general purpose technologies, GPTs, have changed how we process, relate to, and fundamentally instrument our relationship with the world, right? And this is a profound question that is throwing all educators that I meet for a loop in different ways. And I think from an applied perspective, right, if you're looking at, applications of AI for a particular domain, we find lots of usage there. You can be able to find literature, summarize thoughts in ways that you never could before at scale. For a researcher whose bread and butter is how do these systems work and how is that changing us as people, it's a very different question. And so in the classroom, I sort of build around understanding how students are using AI rather than forwarding it or prohibiting it as a tool, right? I'll finish up here, but on the first day of every class, basically say, the one commandment of this class is thou shalt not use generative AI. Immediately after that slide, I say, there's no way I can prevent you from using generative AI. We all know it. So here is why I think you may want to be cautious and have some friction in your relationship with your AI system, is because it's doing things to your cognitive processes that we don't fully understand, and you need to at least have some level of metacognition about how you're interacting with this technology and thinking about how it is changing, for better or for worse, right? There are good and bad outcomes. How that is changing your ability and capacity as a learner. So that's my take.
Drop my notebook. Thank you. Sort of building off of that, I've been using AI in the classroom since 2023, and at first I was hesitant for a lot of the concerns that you mentioned. Primarily privacy for me, which I realize makes me a bit old in comparison to my students because they don't really seem to lead with privacy concerns. I eventually did adopt it tentatively, sort of in bits. I had 3 main uses for it in my classes. At first, I was using it to lead students how they could redo their resume bullet points to match job descriptions and take sort of a fraction of the effort. With the job market right now, I'm hearing reports that they have to fill out dozens, if not hundreds of applications to get their first entry-level role. So you think about how can one individual human generate that much job application material. Generative AI can be really helpful for that, especially when you know how to talk to the software to get the output that's quality. I also attempted, and I will say attempted, to compare my teaching to an AI avatar with text to voice. The students absolutely hated that one. I had one student say that nothing is worse than being lectured to by Siri in a college class. They hated that lesson. They don't want me to go forward with that. Although I hear that that software can now digitize your likeness and your own voice, so if anybody is really curious to try that out and let me know if it's any better, I don't know that I'll be going that far with it. I think the most success I had was actually with the chatbot. I only had one student that said that they felt like it interfered with their autonomy, but the rest of the students were really receptive to it in that sort of supportive role because they could generate practice exam questions, they could ask it clarifying questions, they could ask it, I put the syllabus in its knowledge base so they could ask it things like, when is the final project due? And they found that really helpful. And I had most of the students like it, and their test scores did improve by using it in that capacity.
Thank you. One of the things that I try to do in my first class, well, in introducing myself, I open a chatbot and just ask who is Wade Troxel, and so it's a very minimalistic prompt, and with that I get something back, and it's at best about 50% correct. It has me at University of Colorado, and it has me the mayor of Salida, and so forth. So I find it interesting, but I also use it to illustrate, and so I correct and so forth. But part of that is we're really dealing with something that doesn't have any understanding, doesn't have any reasoning really capabilities. It's really just a symbol manipulating process. And with that, do any of you, in your use of AI and working with students, either undergraduate or graduate, approach and think about the fundamentals of AI and its history, successes, its failures? How do you pose the tool in a way that properly puts it into context as to what it actually is?
So in my natural language processing course, which I teach every fall, the second lecture, that is the first real lecture after, hi, this is me, and this is what this class is about, is we basically start in 600 BC with the first documented study of language, and draw a line from that. Obviously, we jump forward by multiple centuries at a time, to basically what language technology is in the modern day. And generally, we sort of find this trajectory of like AI is a term that was invented in like the 40s, and it is a term of marketing genius right alongside neural networks and machine learning. Right? You hear these things and you imbue them with qualities that they have not necessarily been demonstrated to have. And so that allows us to illustrate how you have solutions that handle 80% of cases with like a rule. Right? I can use a simple rule to correctly pluralize nouns in English by adding an S 80% of the time. Right? In the 20%, okay, that's where things get interesting, and maybe you need to have a somewhat more sophisticated technique. And the whole history of the field has been something like this, and that is, here is what we thought was going to be the solution, and it is the solution for things that are actually kind of boring. And now we'll drill down on the remaining 20%, and now we have a more complicated solution that solves also the 80% most boring things of that remaining set. And that's sort of where we are we have now technologies that have built progressively on these waves of successes and failures of different types of methods, now to things that are much more general purpose, right? Much more sophisticated, require large amounts of data and training, and do solve things that were challenging, even 3 years ago. So for example, no one here anymore is surprised that ChatGPT can speak fluent English. This is what you expect when you log on. However, in 2021, this was not a solved problem. And somewhere between the GPT family, somewhere between like GPT-2 and GPT-3, the model, quote, achieved the ability to speak fluent grammatical English. Now that is the solved problem. And now we're in, okay, well, now it can speak fluently, but it gets, half your bio wrong, mine too. And now it doesn't understand, physical causality. It doesn't understand all these things that, depending on your area of domain you care about. And so it really is a succession of waves, where we talk about AI in these waves: the first wave, the second wave, the third wave. And it is the story of differing, promise and failure and interest that have cascaded upon each other to bring us to this point where now we have technologies that, like I said, I do think they are less interesting, less mysterious, and less cool than you probably think they are. That doesn't mean they're not transformative, because the effect of the technology on our society is what's creating this massive interest, both intellectual and financial. And that is inherent in its history as a field, starting from 600 BC through the 1940s to today.
Yeah. And I like the use of, first of all, recognizing a lot of its shortcomings, failures, but it's all can be transformative. Could you, whoever wants to enter, how is it going to transform education from your perspective, in your discipline? How are you using it in instruction and design? How are you using it in the classroom, that sort of thing?
I mean, there are so many ways that it is making life easier. I mean, you talked about syllabus design. I think if you want to make rubrics, ChatGPT is great. You have to give it criteria, you have to give it some templates, you have to give it some boundaries. But if you want to create a rubric that is going to make your life a lot better and a lot faster at grading, that's a big one. Another one is in online education. There is no classroom. There is no opportunity for me to stand in front of my students and say, ooh, I actually forgot this really fine point in my assignment that I'm now going to tell you about so that you understand what you're supposed to do. Everything that my students need to know about what they're supposed to be doing needs to be in text form in the learning management system for them. So a great test that I can do is tell ChatGPT, here, you are taking this role, you are my student, you have this experience, tell me what you would do with this assignment description. What's missing here? What is unclear? What did I just skip over because I know how to do it and they don't know how to do it? And working through those kinds of things. And to your previous question about how do I deal with the limitations, I kind of glossed over this, but I really do hit home that AI chatbots are not good at facts. We talk a lot about this in my class. As long as the output, the ultimate product output remains with you, you are the person who is supposed to be typing the sentences, making the slides, choosing the visuals. The job of the chatbot in this role is to help you, again, clarify your thinking. It is supposed to be asking you questions to help you drill into what you want to think about and talk about and explore. So that's kind of how we do that. Broader in instructional design, ChatGPT is also great, or any LLM is great at also sort of creating like wrapper text for materials. Again, this is something that if you teach live is super easy to do. You hand out a photocopied slice of a chapter of a book and you're like, this is what this is why we're reading it, pay special attention to these themes. We're gonna be connecting that to our assignment later in the quarter. Again, if I want to tell that to my students, that has to be in the LMS for them. And so that's another thing where it's like, okay, these are my thoughts about this reading. I give the LLM the PDF and I'm like, is there anything else based on what I have told you about my class? Are there any other connective pieces that I didn't think of? And it helps me generate that text or generate those ideas about how I tell my students about what to be paying attention to in the course. Those kinds of materials can also be really significant for students who are in-person classes. You can leverage your LMSs to add in that kind of connective tissue for your class, and I think for in-person students that still would be really beneficial.
Yeah, so when it comes to maybe how it's transforming or changing in a broader sense, I know this is an opinion. It's easier for me in physiology than it is for somebody with a writing heavy discipline. My discipline's writing heavy, but in the courses I teach, I get more flexibility. I think that throughout history, there have been certain things that we have taught in academia that we've slowly decreased or moved away from because of new technologies. One example would be cursive, right? We're not teaching cursive anymore. We have other platforms and ways to do things. So it starts opening the doors to, are there things that maybe we can decrease the emphasis on to focus on other things? And two big gaps that I see is one, students' critical thinking abilities, being able to facilitate that more and focus on that more. And also human interaction, presenting, and public speaking. That's one thing AI can't do for people. We are a social species. Most jobs come from networking. Whether we agree with that or not in its metric or social base is just a fact of our underlying biology. And so giving presentations, being able to answer questions and think on the spot in discussion, that could be harder with an asynchronous class, but students giving a presentation asynchronous can be recorded. I see a lot of increased anxiety with public speaking, but it's incredibly important. And so those are some of the shifts and emphasis I see that might be able to open up if we slowly back off things that might not be as necessary at the depth we used to teach them.
I sort of have a similar thought to what you have. I'm wondering in the future if we're going to be pulling back on what we're teaching the students because it's going to be more of an iterative process. So we're sort of in an awkward space right now, and we don't know how much fundamental knowledge we need to give the students before they're able to productively iterate with AI technology. And if we're looking at this, 5-10 years in the future, we're sort of elevating our entry-level students to a managerial position. If they're going to have AI interns, they're basically supervising the output of these technologies that they're going to be in charge of. So I think that's going to fundamentally alter how we teach, the degrees that we offer. I don't know if this is going to mean we don't have the traditional 4-year degree anymore and we have something like a stackable system where you do your general education and then you do your fundamentals in your discipline and you sort of stack as the changes come about. Because I'm sort of seeing in the landscape of the future, it's kind of unrealistic for us to assume with how rapidly the technology is evolving, our students are going to leave us and have 10, 20, 30-year careers in the same discipline.
Can I just jump in on the presentation thing? LinkedIn Learning now has a little AI coach. If anybody has LinkedIn Learning, you can go in and say, I have this professional context and I want to practice with you. And LinkedIn Learning will then role play with you like they're your boss or they're the C-suite or whoever, and then it'll give you feedback. I was just thinking about presentation skills, and one of the things that strikes me is that yes, students are more nervous about presenting in person. Also, we can give them the opportunity to practice over and over and over again with an AI tool, which will give them the same feedback that we probably would give them on their first 2 or 3 rounds. And that AI gives them an opportunity to sort of get their ums out, get their like nerves or their kind of like rambling out. And LinkedIn is really blunt. It's like, you said 57 times and you rambled on, get to the point.
Yeah, thank you. Now we're going to go to the audience for any questions. So if you're ready, I'll ask one question while you get a microphone to you. So how is AI use different in different disciplines? And so, for example, the liberal arts, history, literature, composition versus science, engineering, and so forth. So any general comments there?
I mean, I know in computer science, it has definitely prompted a reckoning about how what the skills that we want to emphasize are, because the latest model you put all your assignments into it, it's going to do all of them perfectly, and there are maybe some telltale signs that something was done by an AI, but those are not foolproof, and so you have to decide whether you err on the side of caution or being more aggressive in trying to combat this. So at some level, you really have to kind of shift your attitude, right? What are we actually trying to teach people to do in computer science? I mean, it's not really teach the kids to code, right? At some level, any idiot can learn to code. It's computational critical thinking. How do I actually put together, symbols and processes in a way to achieve a goal? And so, like, one thing, just to come back to some use of AI, I guess I lied when I said I don't use AI, because I did use it last semester. When crafting exams, right, one thing that you can do that I found pretty useful was to basically write a traditional exam, have ChatGPT take the exam, and then just manually screw up ChatGPT's answers because they were correct, right? And then the question is, okay, here is what ChatGPT gave me. It's a little incorrect. Find out what's wrong about it, why, and how you would correct it, right? That's not something that, especially when you have like in-person paper exams, the student can just give to an AI, and it demonstrates understanding of the underlying problem. And so kind of reevaluating where AI usage is, prohibited versus allowed versus encouraged. At some level, maybe at like the 100 level, you really are more aggressive in clamping down on it. But by the time you get to the 300 level and you've acquired foundational knowledge, that's where we start to see this sort of K-shaped curve forming, where someone with some expertise can actually upskill quite rapidly with AI, whereas someone who doesn't have the foundational knowledge is going to be stuck in a trough because they don't understand what they're doing right or wrong in the first place. So it sort of comes back to something that was said earlier, which is really an implication that you have to know the right answer in order to make the best use of AI. Like when you're designing your courses, you know all your assumptions that you put into the assignment. The students don't. Mm-hmm. What do you need to make explicit versus leave implicit? And this goes, this is also related to like all the assumptions that are built into AI systems, by the developers from the start, is that there are certain kinds of people with certain backgrounds, and they have prioritized certain things and certain metrics. And often our metrics are, for assessing learning, have always been somewhat askew from actual learning outcomes. Are there opportunities in AI to sort of better align what we say we want versus what we're actually measuring?
Right, thank you. Let's go to the audience.
Let me intervene, and I apologize. My hand waving with the clock over here was just for the panel. So there's about 10 more minutes for panel discussions, and then I'll be obnoxious and interrupt again, and we'll get to the Q&A with the audience. I apologize for the confusion.
No, that's all right. So any other comments on disciplines and use of AI, just from your perspectives?
It's from a biological sciences research perspective, it has been absolutely transformative. We need to make very pretty figures, do lots of data analysis and processing. Anybody who joins my lab at the undergrad or grad level, I give them a week off at the beginning, sometime in the first month, to just go and learn and play with Python, because that's how we wrestle with all our data. But I don't need them to be coders, right? I need them to know how to navigate the code and make sure that they're getting the right output. I always look at these outputs. For example, students will use it for statistical analysis. I'll say, well, why did you set it up that way? They say, I don't know. I say, well, we need to go to the whiteboard and make sure you actually understand your statistical tests and experimental design. But once we get on board with that, they have their data. They need pretty figures. We've been able to make automated codes that I go through line by line and vet and make sure it's doing things properly, where we get data from video for mice, for example, that tracks 27 body parts, every single frame, XY coordinates, and likelihoods. Our code generates about 40 figures, all the statistical output sheets, correlation and regression graphs, zone levels. There's about 700 files that get generated from hitting Shift-Enter. Good luck competing with that, not using AI. You know, it's been so transformative in our productivity. And you have to vet it, but that level of automation is just insane. I could have never done that as a grad student.
You want, yeah.
I'll say something real quick because I do teach design classes, and so when we use AI in our design classes, we get into a situation where are we going to infringe on copyright? So if we give it inspiration, so that's a sort of unique disciplinary consideration when we're implementing AI. But when we're iterating, when we're in that stage, it's fundamental. I mean, we can generate hundreds, thousands of different, just minutely changed images and designs.
And I teach design class as well, and one of the things I find interesting is when they have experience in design, they're much better in utilizing the tool. And so, an example there, so if they're taking senior design while they're also taking AI in design class, they actually bring some subject matter expert kind of insight in, you know, the questions, the prompting, and what's going on. So, as opposed to design as an abstract concept, and what are they trying to do? And we talk about, you know, different design frameworks and things, but I think that's important. Kerry?
Yeah, so our student population is non-traditional students. Almost all of them are working full-time. Our instructors are almost all working full-time. So our challenge is that our professionals are all using AI in their jobs, however they're using it. There's this, you know, huge race for everybody to be AI equipped and for everybody to deploy AI in their professional setting. And we are playing catch up in trying to develop our classes for our professional students to like both acknowledge that that's what they're doing and also sort of put those guardrails up and say, hey, maybe your organization deployed this, but maybe they didn't think about it. Maybe it is now your job to go and raise the ethical concerns. Maybe it is your job now to go raise the privacy concerns. So for us, our students tend to be less interested in theory and more interested in how do I do this tomorrow at work. And so that's a challenge that we have too, which is thinking about helping our students understand enough of what the model is doing, understanding enough of how it works. You know, it might be embedded in your HR system, but there's already lawsuits happening about that. So to what degree ought you use the tools or not? Again, I talked about how I use it in my classroom, but part of our sort of like subject study is how do we catch up with what's happening on the ground, and how do we help students be movers and shakers in the way that then happens?
You know, in preparation for this panel, you know, I was thinking about what is the university for, and thinking about AI in education specifically. And with that, you know, and really thinking about the fundamental purpose of universities in the first place is codification and preservation of knowledge. So as we think about AI and the codification and preservation of knowledge, and from that tool, and with that, there are three things that really are the underpinning of the origin and purpose of universities: preservation and transmission of knowledge, so the ability to communicate that, and so serve as the stewards of human understanding, archiving, codifying, passing on accumulated knowledge, wisdom, and cultural heritage across generations. Another one is creation of new knowledge, so the kind of the research function. So through research, exploration, and critical inquiry, universities push the boundaries of what is known, advancing science, philosophy, art, technology to shape future possibilities. And the next is education and formation of individuals. So beyond just the training of specific careers, universities develop thinkers and citizens, fostering intellectual growth, ethical reasoning, and capacity for lifelong learning. You know, I can see our role as educators in the university and researchers in the university and as citizens in our broader communities from the university, you know, and it impacts all those sorts of things that underpin really, I think, the university. So I think with that, let's go to the audience if there's anybody.
We'll have two floating microphones in 1 second as soon as I borrow back the one that you guys were so gently borrowed from us. So
Yep.
Thank you very much. And Rob, I think Matt right behind you's got a question.
Yeah, super interesting panel. Yeah, two things I'd love to hear the panel comment on. One is the way AI as an aid as opposed to a crutch just becomes an amazing reducer of barriers to entry in different pursuits. I think about, I have a 9-year-old niece who wrote an AI based app, fashion app. So you write into the dialog box what occasion you're going out for and various things, and it like draws you an outfit, which is really cool. And then the second thing is, to what extent do you think that AI through pattern recognition becomes kind of a mirror in ways that are insightful to society? So back to my niece's fashion app, if you ask it to give you an outfit for the Met Gala, it produces some pretty weird stuff, right? That's, I think, is an interesting social commentary about the Met Gala. And there are other examples, right? Like the Gemini not being able to say who was worse, Elon Musk or Hitler, right? Which maybe was holding up a mirror to its woke programmers. So yeah, can you comment on kind of the reducing barriers to entry and also kind of the way maybe it holds up an uncomfortable mirror sometimes to society?
Sure. I can address the second one first. There's sort of two ways that we see this happening, and there's a regression to the mean effect and there's a distillation effect, and that is, and these go back to sort of the questions of transmission and preservation of knowledge. Mm-hmm. The way that these models are trained are under vast quantities of human data that is sourced from people. Usually, the way it's done is usually you have like, here's a response A, here's a response B. I need you to pick the better one to this context. Right? Do that at scale, you get a reasonable distribution of what you would expect from responses. What that also does is it tends to be very good at producing what an average person would say. Who is the average person? Well, spoiler alert, the average person doesn't actually exist. There is no average person. I'm going to use the forbidden word diversity. What you're losing is you're losing the really kind of jagged response distribution that we get from sampling everybody with their background and individual experience. And so the difference between the crutch and the aid, I would say, is sort of where are you using it to speak instead of you, as opposed to where are you using it to maybe craft the foundation of what you're trying to say in a way that maybe you couldn't quite get out because you were hungry or whatever, and then rewriting it to actually sound like yourself. That's sort of the regression to the mean effect. The distillation effect is where we see kind of what you said, which is like, I have sort of a trope of like what a Met Gala dress would look like, and I'm just gonna Flanderize this. And I say Flanderize, Ned Flanders from The Simpsons like didn't start out as like such a cartoon, ironically. Like they sort of picked a couple of traits of his, and over the seasons he became more and more extreme in those traits. That's what AI is doing. Right? It's taking something like a grain of truth about the thing to begin with. It's like, I'm going to focus on this thing ad nauseum, sort of to exhaustion. And so that's what's happening. We also see, again, because training data is now AI generated, it's also training on its own output. And when that doesn't cause the model to sort of collapse into garbage completely, it just sort of generates these really weird, peaky extremes about whatever the thing is. So there's a difference between sort of your attitude going into it. It's like, what do I actually want to get out of this system? Do I not know what I want? If I don't know what I want, I'm probably just going to use it as a crutch. If I know what I want, then I can use it to write an app for a specific purpose or design a course. And then you can sort of navigate your way through these regression to the mean or distillation effects to actually produce something that is I think, more truly reflective of your sort of innate goals and desires rather than just, recombining bits and pieces of patterns that it's seen before.
I'll take the second one first. One of the things that has scared me a little bit that the students are using AI for is to have virtual office hours where they simulate an interaction with their professor because they're too socially anxious to go to actual office hours. So for me, that poses a number of problems when we're thinking about the mirror of AI. The students are not actually interacting with their professor, for one. But also the students are only going to be interacting with a virtual simulation of what they perceive their professor to be. So if we're talking about that one thing they hate about their professor, that might just be what they get repeatedly when they're trying to have a virtual interaction with their professor. But in terms of reducing barriers to entry, absolutely. That's why I sort of made my comment about how realistic is it for us to think we're setting students up for 10, 20, 30-year degrees when we're having AI be multifaceted. So you could, if you wanted to, I can't vouch for how good mine would be. You could make a video and have AI simulated video, text-to-speech, all of that whatnot, and produce your own video without any outside oversight. So we have to think about that as well when we're talking about reducing barriers to entry. That's sort of across the board in a lot of professions.
So again, we have a different student body. We have a lot of career changers coming in. So one of the things you can do, which is useful when you're talking about barriers to entry, is you can say, hey, maybe you've never taken a class on this before. Maybe you actually have literally no idea what we're talking about. We're going to assume that the readings are pitched at this level, but if you're actually down here, like, I'm going to use AI to just generate you a little primer. Again, I know it's right because I am an expert in this, so like, here's a primer for you. And it really can help bring them into the conversation in a way they wouldn't have been able to in there before. But also to your point about looking in a mirror, an activity I actually really enjoy doing, I teach a class on learning in organizations, is I have them go to an image generator and just type in like, show me learning at work. And the funny thing is that it always shows a bunch of people in suits, but in a classroom with like a whiteboard and a podium. And I'm like, so what do you observe here? What does that tell us about what we all think learning looks like? What does that tell us about what we think of being in an organization? And let's comment on that, because somewhere in your mind, your mental model is also that this is what learning is. So I use image generators to talk about our mental models because it does hold up that mirror. And then it's like, oh, well, is that really reality? Is that really what I meant? And that's kind of the point you made too, is this saying what I meant, or is this saying some amalgamation of the average? And encouraging students to then say, oh, that's not what I meant. That's not what I had in mind. Or I want to go deeper than this.
One of the things I try to emphasize multiple times through the class is, where's the intelligence? And ask that question rhetorically, but really looking for it. And I emphasize intelligence is on the front end of the prompt and on the back end of the response. It's not the AI. So, and with that, it's, in talking with Amy earlier today, she made a comment that instead of beginning to end, it's really middle to middle. And what that means to me is really the role is, the intelligence is the person that is in fact using the tool, and don't lose that. A lot of the language really ascribes and the intelligence to the generative AI, and it's not. There's no intelligence there. They're only really trying to put in some reasoning capabilities, but it's not really grounded. I mean, one of the emphasis of Nikhil's research is grounding a lot of the things that what these symbols actually mean. I have one exercise that uses a Far Side cartoon. That is this one guy that gets frustrated and he's outside his house and he paints CAT on the cat, and HOUSE on the house, and TREE on the tree. Says, now that settles things. So really attaching these symbols that are being manipulated, that have been trained through these and into these large LLMs, and through this Bayesian statistical process, generating tokens that have some sort of output that we then interpret. There's no intelligence there. It's really, the intelligence is in the use either. And so, I think important part is keeping a clear perspective of what this is as a tool and not ascribing more to it than what it really it is. Other questions?
Am I hearable? Okay. Well, then I forgot my question. No, I'm thinking about sort of a blind spot that I see in relation to education potentially in the descriptions of efficiencies and increased capacity. Think about the ways in which we're in a moment where generally as adults, especially adults in higher educational contexts, we've developed a set of capacities through, slowly evolved practices, and those are internal capacities. And technologies are great for externalizing capacity, which is great for efficiency, right? But the way in which it helps us that already have those developed capacities to then amplify those or externalize those, I'm not sure if we're sensitive enough to the ways in which what it took to develop those capacities in us. And I think a lot of these shortcuts, a lot of these efficiencies, a lot of our enthusiasm, like, gosh, I can do this and it helps me with these things, that subsequent generations won't have the opportunity to internalize those capacities adequately. And then I wonder about really risk and dependence. Like folks might be familiar with that scenario that is in Marx, but I think he got it from Rousseau, and maybe Rousseau got it from somewhere else. But the people who can climb trees to get fruit to eat, but then some clever person invents a ladder. And within a couple generations, people can't climb the trees without a ladder anymore. That capacity is externalized. And then someone comes along and burns all the ladders, and that's when all the people starve, right? So thinking about this internalization versus externalization of capacity, and maybe all the AI ladders aren't going to get burned one day, but I am told we don't have enough helium on Earth to keep these data centers cool. So I'm wondering about like the transformational effects. Like, should we worry about the ability to do without, and what does that mean for our educational and pedagogical approaches?
Yes, you should worry. You should worry more than you are probably worrying. There are two things that I read in your question. One is sort of the word efficiency is kind of a code for a lot of the intrinsic motivators of both sort of adults generally, especially in the workspace, and also AI companies. But it's kind of orthogonal to the learning that got us to the place that we are. So I am an effective user of AI because I had 30 years of, slightly less than 30 years, 20 odd years of not using AI before it, and learning sort of how to articulate my wants and needs in the context of evolving AI, where I'm doing this at the same time that AI is becoming better and better. My kids, I think, have no idea that AI exists, because I have not introduced the concept to them yet. And part of that is, I guess, experimental, to try and make sure that they have at least some semblance of the same scaffolding that I had growing up that I think turned me into a reasonable human being. At the same time, right, what we see is an incentive structure in the development of AI that is not, I would not even say orthogonal to learning goals, but actually, counterthetical to learning goals. Because there's a push to rapidly adopt these things earlier and earlier and earlier, because of the need to expand the user base to satisfy the financial incentives of the company. OpenAI has never turned a profit, and they may never turn a profit, ever. How do they keep getting investment is because you can project continued growth. And that involves effectively these shortcuts in the development perspective of, we're going to get more data, we're going to have more data centers, we're going to throw more compute power at the data, and it's going to give us a better model. But then we see, right, people were very disappointed with with GPT-5 when it came out last week, because it was hyped up to be this truly transformative, next level revolution in AI. And what people found was, like, maybe it's better at coding than GPT-4, but it's also more terse and I like it less. And so perhaps the efficiency that they were trying to incentivize was like, we're going to do better coding and it's going to be a better reasoning model. But that's also not what people are actually using the previous generation for. They were using it for things like, companionship and having a talking partner. And so our incentives that we internalize as human beings are orthogonal or opposite those of the externalized incentives that are driving the development of AI. And at some level, those two things are going to have to collide. Right? We either have to fundamentally transform how AI is developed, deployed, and used, or we have to give up the ghost and we're all going to start using this ladder and hope it never gets burned down.
Mm-hmm. One of the ways that it illustrates to me how brittle these systems actually are is it's easy to fool people. And so when people are in the loop of using something that we call AI, it's easy to show the fallibility or ascribe more to what is being produced and so forth. When you begin to have autonomous machines that don't have a human agent in the loop, you begin to really see the frailties. When you have an autonomous car in a parking lot, it fails miserably, but it does well in an interstate that has a lot of the context, well-described, signage and markings on the road and that sort. And it might slow down when it begins to get in a situation. Or in that context, what happens when it's developed in Arizona, but then it's faced with a snowstorm, a totally different environment. So the understanding, the grounding of all the symbols and the meaning fail miserably when you are in an autonomous machine where there isn't necessarily a human that has that that background that literally goes before birth all the way to who we are today in action and interaction within the worlds in which we find ourselves. I remember seeing a YouTube video of a Tesla car in autonomous mode on a tarmac of an airport, and it went gleefully crashing into the tail of an airplane, having no idea because it was totally out of context of being what a tarmac was versus on a road. And so, I think that's illustration of how brittle these systems actually are. And to Nikhil's point, it isn't necessarily more computational power that makes them better. And so, because there are fundamental limits of computation, NP-complete problems and things like that, they're boundaries. And so, that all has to go into the understanding of what we're doing. I think right now we're just playing with toys, and very expensive toys. And there's a lot of, hope and optimism, but there's also a lot of distress as to what might happen as well. And so, it's really incumbent upon us and so many of our different disciplines to really bring this to light in our understanding of what we're doing and how we're doing it.
I'm going to, again, have to intervene. Jen, I am sorry. I'm doing my best to stay on task, so forgive me.
I have one sentence.
Go for it.
I wish we had more time. I wish we had time for a measured adoption of AI in the classroom.
Well played. Would you join me in saying thank you for this panel?